Voice of Yoga.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will talk about fear as the defense mechanism of the false sense of self. Listen as we explore the symbolism of putting up the sword and turning the cheek as methodology for abiding in the spiritual fact of oneness. In this podcast, we teach the application of divine law to dissolve the belief in vulnerability. Welcome to The Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live by grace. Swami, the title of today's podcast is Practicing Sheathing the Sword of Fear. I'd like to break that title down just a little bit. First of all, we need to practice something. I'm sure we'll talk about that, but what do we mean by the sword of fear?
Yeah, well, like we say, fear is a defense mechanism for the false sense of self. Without having a false sense of self, there's no fear. In John 6:20, Jesus said, "It is I, be not afraid." Now the question we ask is, how can there be fear in the presence of the immortal self, one perfect eternal life, looking at itself, as itself, of itself, to itself, without opposition? Fear is unknown to the divine self. It is only the belief in a second sense of self, driven by the belief in two powers, where fear emerges. So when we stand in fear, we are sowing to the flesh and not the spirit. Fear is the signal, I'm in the wrong self. As Mrs. Eddy says in miscellaneous writing, page 355, The Way, she states, the present stage of progress in Christian Science presents two opposite aspects, a full-orbed promise and a gaunt want. The need, however, is not of the letter, but the spirit. Less teaching and good healing is today the acme of well done. A healing that is not guesswork, chronic recovery, ebbing and flowing, but instantaneous cure. This absolute demonstration of science must be revived. To consummate the desideratum, mortal mind must pass through 3 stages of growth. End of quote. Now, she outlines the stages as 1, self-knowledge, 2, humility, and 3, love. In Kriya Yoga, there are 4 major obstructions to enlightenment: fear, ignorance, laziness, and selfishness. And conscious awareness of the divine principle brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, enthusiasm to overcome laziness, and purpose to overcome selfishness. We keep it all together with the zodiac and assign these obstructions to the elements: fire, earth, air, water. That gives us a way to keep all of this information in the foreground of our thought, because we have this diagram that we work with. Today, we'll try and focus on the methodology we can employ in order to practice, like we say, sheathing the sword of fear, putting up a defense that requires no defense.
Swami, you said earlier, virtue overcomes fear. So what does that look like when we're doing that? So virtue becomes the sheath we're talking about?
In this model, we understand there's a developmental process. We graduate from unconscious to self-conscious to superconscious awareness. Humans in the adult state, in spiritual identity, are virtuous by nature. To understand yourself to be spirit, to be one, in tandem with the immortal self, overcomes the belief in a good and evil concept of life. Even in Mary Baker Eddy's miscellaneous writing, The Way, the second stage of mental development is humility. Then she continues, this virtue triumphs over the flesh. It is the genius of Christian Science. One can never go up until one has gone down in his own esteem. Humility is lens and prism to the understanding of mind healing. It must be had to understand our textbook. It is indispensable to personal growth and points out the charts of its divine principle and rule of practice. End of quote. We also have to understand now what she means by humility. She's not talking about false modesty. Humility in this model is the spiritual request of meekness. It is basically what happens to the human with the realization of one perfect divine life. We're not trying to improve this human experience. We are trying to aspire to know the truth. There's only one life here, and it is the life of God. We're not fixing a mental material concept. We're dissolving the belief in something other than this one perfect divine life. And so the more we understand the how-to, the methodology, this idea of born again of spirit becomes more and more evident as an essential component in this process. If we don't overcome the belief in life and matter, then we really never get rid of the obstruction. And so we don't kill the body or deny that we have a physical body. We come out of the belief and we understand the body as it is. It is a reflection of the mortal mind. It's not the image and likeness of the divine. So we treat it differently. And in fact, we shift our identity from mental material to spiritual. And we understand that accepting and living in the knowledge of the infinite immortal self takes care of what seems to be a finite sense of self. And so it's very important that we begin to understand that we're not just trying to be good humans here. We are transcending the belief in a temporary sense of life. In my opinion, this was the pitfall of Orthodox religion, that we employ these strategies and we try and work on our conduct rather than the connection to the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence.
So I'd like to explore the symbolism of putting up the sword and turning the cheek, as we mentioned in the summary. I think we need a deeper understanding of what turning the cheek really means. Can you help with that?
Yeah, what we're trying to understand here is, like we said in the opening, as methodology for abiding in the spiritual fact of oneness. You can't just jump off of the boat and walk on water kind of a thing, that we have to develop the capability. And so the same with putting up the sword. We are accustomed to defending ourselves mentally and physically. Now we want to employ a completely different method, spiritual understanding, and to learn how to rely on the sustaining infinite as your source of protection, your source of supply. You live and move and have your being and rely totally on the invisible, intangible omnipresence. Because as Mary Baker Eddy said, we render the divine law of healing void and obscure when we weigh it in the same scale as the human or limit in any direction of thought. So we learn how to initially think differently. This idea of turning the cheek, turning away from the mental material appearance. And as Paul told us, learning how to walk by faith, not by sight. You're developing the faculty that perceives the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence. And we do this by trusting. Conscious awareness, the divine principle is running a perfect universe. And you would do this in proportion to your level of understanding of it. You don't just deny the mental material concept. We must develop the faculty that enables us to perceive the truth. And then the idea of turning away from thinking with 5 corporeal senses and now living out from knowing the truth. Consciousness is experience. We can only externalize what we are conscious of. And thinking about the divine creative principle is not being conscious of it. So there's this process we enlist and we employ until eventually we learn how to rely on the sustaining infinite. But you don't just jump into the water and think you're going to walk on it.
Swami, I'm wondering if you could take a deeper dive into the fear, ignorance, laziness, and selfishness, and help us understand what we can do to try to overcome these.
We use the zodiac, the elements, fire, earth, air, water. We use it for physical functions, mental functions, and also the obstructions. And the reason why I like it so much is because you're working with a diagram that holds all of this information together. When you plot this, one of the things you'll notice is we name them in fear, ignorance, laziness, and selfishness, but in the zodiac, the elements unfold in fire, earth, air, water in that progression. So there's again requiring this turning that happens with consciousness. So you would approach it would be more like selfishness, laziness, ignorance, and then fear. And yet, as Mary Baker Eddy says, fear is the first thing you want to try and allay in this process. But you also learn relativity. Everything affects everything. I really like what C.S. Lewis said, and I paraphrase it. Perfect love casts out fear, but so do lots of other things. Alcohol, stupidity, ignorance. There are lots of things that we could be doing that we manage our sense of fear. But it's very important that we do not let these other methods of managing this fear do it before perfect love casts out the fear. So we're aspiring to becoming a human in the adult state, to knowing ourselves spiritually. And when you break it down and you use something like the zodiac, it's a very helpful tool. Say, for example, if you broke it down, fire, selfishness, the antidote is purpose. The cardinal sign of fire is Aries, and the attribute that corresponds with Aries is bravery. The fixed sign is Leo, And the attribute that corresponds with Leo is loyalty. And the mutable sign is Sagittarius, which is reverence. And so you're starting to see how things fit together. You have the mental function of fire is intuition or prescience, and the physical function is endurance. So you've got a broader way of coming at this. Earth would be laziness, is the obstruction. The antidote is enthusiasm, an incredible word because it means with theos, in tandem with the divine principle. And then you go through the earth signs. Capricorn is cardinal, and the attribute is obedience. Taurus is fixed, and the attribute is thriftiness. Virgo is mutable, and the attribute is cleanliness. The mental function is perception or sense, and the physical function is strength. When you get to air, the obstruction is ignorance. The antidote is wisdom. Now the air signs. Libra is the cardinal, and the attribute is courtesy. Aquarius is the fixed sign. The attribute is friendliness. Gemini is the mutable sign, and the attribute is cheerfulness. Reason is the mental function or intellect, and the physical function is flexibility. Water, the obstruction is fear. The antidote is virtue. The cardinal water sign is Cancer. The attribute is helpfulness. Scorpio, the fixed sign. The attribute is trustworthiness. Pisces is the mutable sign, and the attribute is kindness. The mental function is memory or feeling, and the physical function is balance. So now you have a way of looking at this from a larger point of perspective, and you can start to see the relativity. I always think of Ben Franklin, for the want of a nail, a shoe is lost. For the want of a shoe, a horse is lost. For the want of a horse, a rider is lost. For the want of a rider, a platoon is lost. For the want of a platoon, a battle is lost. For the want of a battle, a war is lost. Something as incidental as the loss of a nail from a shoe contributes to the monumental loss of a war. Relativity. So something as significant as not paying attention to the details of what we would use this idea of know thyself. Know yourself in the way that you're created, not in the way you do when you're left to your own devices. And of course, we're not talking about just a personal sense of self. We're talking about the impersonal, immortal, divine self of absolute wholeness.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance at Institute for Personal Development Incorporated, Kriya Yoga Ashram, is a complete program for anyone looking to demonstrate divine law with scientific certainty. To demonstrate divine law, conscious awareness of divine truth is necessary. The spiritual advance starts with the divine creation, beginning with the principle, life is perfect, resting in the knowledge life is eternal, formless, changeless, and absolute good. The practitioner retreats from the obstructions which are the veiling conditions of the mortal mind, then rests in the knowledge of the divine principle, thus revealing the precept, consciousness is experience. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com and begin living under spiritual truth. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So we have something here by Mary Baker Eddy, and this is from her works from Miscellany, and it can be found on page 242. I'll read it. You are scientifically correct in your statement about yourself. You can never demonstrate spirituality until you declare yourself to be immortal and understand that you are so. Christian Science is absolute. It is neither behind the point of perfection nor advancing towards it. It is at this point and must be practiced therefrom. Unless you fully perceive that you are the child of God, hence perfect, you have no principle to demonstrate and no rule for its demonstration. By this, I do not mean that mortals are the children of God, far from it. In practicing Christian Science, you must state its principle correctly, or you forfeit your ability to demonstrate it. End of the passage. Swami, what are your insights on this passage?
Yeah, like she told us, and I'll paraphrase it, for Jesus to walk water was science. But until poor humanity walks on water, for them to step out onto the Atlantic isn't wisdom or science. You don't want to try and do this without knowing the truth. And when you're trying to do this with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image, and you are still trying, striving, struggling, seeking, planning, asking, it can get very frustrating. The more you understand how to call into expression the divine creation, you start with a belief in the divine creation. You don't just jump into the water. By the same token, you can walk by faith, not by sight. You can believe in the divine creation and be somewhat of a faithful witness, but you're not going to be able to demonstrate divine law with scientific certainty until you know yourself to be spiritual and understand yourself to be so. She's really cautioning us in when and how to start to demonstrate divine law.
I'm going to read, this is from Joel Goldsmith's The Contemplative Life, Chapter 5. Put up thy sword, that's the heading. As human beings, we live by power. Most of us rely on material or mental power of some kind. It may be a stronger form of material power overcoming a lesser form of material power, or it may be a mental power overcoming a mental force. But the entire human experience consists of overcoming one power by the use of a higher or stronger power. In the metaphysical world, the forces of matter are overcome by the forces of mind, resulting in mind over matter and even mind over mind. End of this quote. Swami, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the difference between mental material and spiritual. When we're doing things with human will and personal sense, we're under the law of karma. We still are operating under the belief in two powers, and it is essentially a hypnotic state. And so we haven't overcome this world. As Jesus said, I have overcome the world. We overcome the world by knowing the truth. There's only one life here, and it's perfect, whole, and complete. When we are still living out from the belief in the many, we're not under the government of divine law. We're not under the protection of divine law. It always reminds me of the movie Gandhi, where those people in India were walking up to the British soldiers and they were getting knocked down. And all of this would be considered humility. But for me, it's just ignorance, because you are trying to do something that isn't designed to work that way. You can't have a personal sense of self and be conscious of the divine truth. And in the same way, you can't be conscious of the divine truth and get clubbed down. If you're under divine jurisdiction, then you're under the protection of divine law. There is no sickness, suffering, disease, violence, lack, limitation in divine truth. So we have to go back to the drawing board and know ourselves correctly.
I'm going to continue reading from Joel Goldsmith's Contemplative Life, Chapter 5. On the path of the fourth dimension, however, this is done away with because in the fourth dimension, there is no power. Here we make use of no power. Here we enter the realm revealed by the Master, the resist not evil realm, the put up thy sword realm. Here we learn to relax and put up our mental sword, and when we are tempted with a material or a mental power, threatening our comfort, health, well-being, safety, or security, we do not deny or affirm. Instead, we release ourselves from any resistance to that which is appearing to us as evil in any form. End of the passage. So it sounds like he's talking about what you just tried to explain to us.
Yes, probably because I got it from him. This idea of learning how to control how we think, how to make our mind an avenue of awareness for the operations of divine mind. Stop thinking with 5 corporeal senses. Start knowing with 7 spiritual senses. Letting divine mind do its knowing in your awareness. When we're doing this, we're letting the Lord build the house. I'm not trying, struggling, or striving. I am resting in the knowledge. The divine principle is running a perfect universe. Like Jesus said, it's the Father within that does the work. But we have to master the tendency to respond, to run out and try and fix whatever it is that doesn't seem like it has divine quality. And all of this is going to require discipline and the development of a personal sense of self, developing your mental functions so you can control how you think. Once you have mastered these modes of mortal thinking, the 3 modes of mortal thinking, then you walk reason through the open door of revelation, where you surrender this personal sense of self because you can rest in the knowledge. God is running a perfect universe, and in this kingdom of heaven, there are no problems. It is perfect, whole, and complete.
Swami, so what else should we know about dissolving the belief in vulnerability?
Well, primarily you want to understand that vulnerability is only in the false sense of self. So when we're feeling fear, anxiety, worry, we know we're not in the right self anymore. Unfortunately for us, though, we don't know what it's like to be in the true sense of self. So we have to educate our thought up to spiritual apprehension. You want to have a mental landscape that will support this experience. And then starting to practice, not reacting to the testimony of the senses, and at the same time, not just being senselessly optimistic and denying the testimony of the senses when you are not under the protection of divine law. So you go about this gradually. You test whatever it is that you understand about being the one immortal self until eventually your belief graduates to faith, where your faith is now starting to appear in your experiences. You're starting to get the testimony of the senses corrected with your conscious awareness of this truth. And now you can graduate from faith to understanding, where you then understand yourself to be one with the divine principle. And then, of course, you're walking in the kingdom of heaven on earth.
So, thank you for your insights for today's podcast, Practicing Sheathing the Sword of Fear. Listeners, be sure to visit the website, www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages, as you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there you could press that would further your understanding. Swami, any final thoughts about today's podcast?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live by grace. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.